Summer League is done. Some guys were fighting for contracts. Some guys were fighting for more money. Some guys were looking to make the Pacers. Where does the back end of the Pacers roster stand now? Who shined? Who didn't? Who's going to get money? Who's not? What is the situation? And some other free agency considerations all coming for you today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Wednesday and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today we are talking more free agency-ish, roster-ish about the Pacers with Summer League done, because Summer League mattered more for the Pacers roster than most teams, still filling out the back end of their team, an open roster spot, maybe two. We'll get to that in a second. All of their two-way spots still open. Lots of guys in consideration, potentially external free agents still in the mix. There's a ton we have to get to today. We'll all circle around some familiar names for all of you, but a couple places that are worth starting, right? Keith Smith at Spotrac tweeted the other day, all of the teams with, how many contract slots they have open, right? The Pacers are the only team, them and the Cavs are the only teams with all of their two-way slots still open, right? Like, there's clearly something they're still considering when it comes to that. Lots of teams have an open roster spot. Some teams are even over it in terms of the Hawks and Wizards. But the Pacers clearly wanted more information, or still do want more information some way before signing this stuff. Well, now there's nothing else they can really get information-wise before training camp. It's about what they want and what the players involved want. And that's why Summer League mattered, because it was a data gathering exercise contractually just as much as anything. And so a lot of our focus today when it comes to all that stuff is going to be looking at the back of the roster and the names to think about. The ones we're focusing on today are the ones you probably expected to hear, right? Kendall Brown, technically under contract. We'll talk about that. The draft picks late in round 2. So Tristen Newton and Enrique Freeman. Johnny Furphy already has signed his deal with the Pacers, that 4-year contract. And then Oscar Tshiebwe and Quenton Jackson, who are restricted free agents, right? They have a qualifying offer out there after being on a 2-way to end last season. So where does that leave the Pacers? That's a lot of players. So if you don't remember, or you haven't been up to speed at all, the Pacers have right now 14 players with a contract for next season, right? One of those players is Kendall Brown, whose deal is currently fully non-guaranteed for next season. We'll talk about him a lot today. And one of those players is James Wiseman, whose deal is $500,000 guaranteed next season, but might as well be guaranteed for opening night, because if they signed him and cut him before the season started, that would be stunning. So they have an open roster spot, and they could waive Brown and get to 2. And all 3 of their two-way spots remain. So what was learned in Summer League and has this all kind of tied together, right? Something that was learned in Summer League that is only adjacently related to what we're talking about, to get this out of the way first, is James Johnson was at a game. James Johnson showed up in the first quarter of Pacers Nets with Obi Toppin and Pascal Siakam, watched the game with the team, right? Lots of the core roster was there. Almost all of them were at, that USA-Canada game before. Right. So clearly James Johnson is still a part of these guys' lives. He's still a free agent though. Right. And so what I don't know is, do the Pacers actually want him back? Does he want to play again? Right. Those are the questions I'd have to know if that makes sense. But I will say an important undercurrent before we really dive into what Summer League meant for all this is they can still right now add a 15th player and avoid the tax and stay in the same position they are. In theory, they'd be scared of some bonuses, but they'd be fine. So that it'd have to be a 1-year minimum contract to fit under, but it's possible. And so James Johnson is still technically a consideration worth monitoring, as any veteran could be, right? Thad Young type of player, George Hill type of player. I'm not saying anyone specifically besides James Johnson, but any one of those guys could be in the mix. James Johnson, of course, still very tight with the guys and literally went to a game because their salary structure allows it. I'm going to keep bringing it up until it's over. However, they have enough space for everyone right now. And yet that is relevant because they don't need to make a decision on Kendall Brown right now, which is where this all starts, because Kendall Brown has a contract, right? He signed this 3-year deal back in March, where last season was guaranteed. And then this season is non-guaranteed, as is next year, right? Next year's a non-guaranteed team option. So the double whammy there. So they don't like, he did not play well. That is the place to start here, because all the talk in the offseason for me, from everybody, was, okay, if Kendall Brown's going to make the team, right, his contract has $250,000 become guaranteed on opening night, right? If he's still on the team on opening night, if he's going to make the team, he's got to play well in the summer and prove that he should be on the team this season, that he makes sense as a depth piece, a young player worth investing in. This is going to be his third season, right? He's still really young, but this is going to be his third season. So the reason that it all matters, that they have this flexibility where they can fit in another player and all that, is they don't need to decide on Kendall Brown right now. In fact, in the offseason, you can carry up to 21 players under contract, including your two-ways, and they're only at 14 with just their roster guys. They have an open spot on the roster. They have the 3 two-ways, and they even have 3 potential training camp guys, right? So they can keep Kendall Brown no problem right now. It's not hurting them. It's not hurting him, unless it's preventing him from getting a deal elsewhere, but they would just cut him in that case most likely anyway. So, there is no harm in keeping Brown right now. But I think, obviously, he did not help his case to make the team in Summer League, right? 9.6 points a game. He's not really a scorer type, but shot 41.5% from the field, 20% from deep is not good enough. I think he made 2 threes the whole Summer League, right? Like, that's not good enough from him. Rebounding was, assists was not there. More turnovers than assists. The defensive force wasn't high enough. Like, he didn't play well enough. He just, quite frankly, didn't play well enough to prove unequivocally this guy should be in the mix for a spot on the team, right? And that matters. That is what he's fighting for. And so the reason this all stacks and comes together is, I still think that he'll be maybe they don't need it, but the cap situation allows for them to keep him into training camp. And then maybe something happens in training camp where he looks amazing. Maybe a forward gets injured. I don't know. There's a lot of things that could, in theory, happen. And so maybe he just makes it to training camp and then pops and looks good, or something has changed, or who knows? There's a number of things that could happen. But by then, that is the final chance for him to prove it. His training camp, preseason, and all that with his contract. So I imagine what happened in Summer League is his chances of making the team probably dropped a little bit, even though they can fit him in. So there's no reason to rush to cut him, although tax wiggle room is always nice. So if maybe they can bring in someone else for camp competition and feel better about that. If that might not have been something they were thinking about. That's, I think, the biggest consequences. Now it makes more sense to bring in another non-guaranteed player and say, hey, you could make our team. There is a chance for someone else to be on this roster come opening night. And if you don't play well, they could cut both, right? There's ways to do that. They need to sign another player to do that, because you have to have 14 at some point. But that is why I brought up the cap situation first, is because they don't have to make a decision on Kendall Brown before training camp right now or anything like that. They can even add more players still. But he did not do himself any favors, and I think his chances of being on the team, especially deep into this coming season, are much lower than they were before this. Again, it's $250,000 of his contract that becomes guaranteed if he's on the team on opening night. So the way that this all works is there's a daily cap hit and all that. And so that's about $250,000 is about 21 days of the season. So that they could, in theory, give him that much more time. They already have promised him that once the season starts. But that, what's the point of that? They cut Ben Moore about 2 weeks into the season. In 2018, he got $160,000, even though he had $40K guaranteed that year, 45, something like that. So it's not unheard of with this front office, but I think Kendall Brown's chances of being at least around for the long haul went down, but I think you'll hear his name into training camp and they can wait. Or even maybe slightly into the season, but they don't have it. That might not overlap with the G League enough for them to even see him in that sort of setting. So a tricky reality, certainly, for Kendall Brown right now. Now, perhaps the answer is that his guarantee date gets adjusted, but there's no real point to that. So that's all still TBD. But I think his chances of making the team went down, especially if James Johnson or some other vets stick around. They already have the 14 in the mix. Okay, so that's all in the air. Now, here's the other thing. They still have it's still open roster spots, right? Even those extra training camp ones or whatever. But if they cut Kendall Brown or they don't bring back James Johnson, could they actually sign standard contract Enrique Freeman, standard contract Tristen Newton? That's allowed. That is actually allowed. They could have those spots, as could Oscar Tshiebwe, as could Quenton Jackson, right? The difference here is rookie minimums are lower than guys who have years of service. Quenton Jackson has 2, Oscar Tshiebwe has 1. And if you're flirting with the luxury tax, that does have some value, Now that you'd have to like the player more, obviously, to have them on the roster instead of a two-way, but that is an option, right? They could say, here's how we settle the situation where we have 4 guys who could theoretically get two-ways. You're all on the team. One of you gets a roster spot. I don't know who they would pick of the 4. I guess Enrique Freeman, but it would be kind of weird. Not that politics really matter, but like making the 50th pick get a contract and the 49th pick get a two-way. Again, not a huge deal, but that is certainly a path that is possible and within reason for them. Again, having a very cheap contributor makes a lot of sense. Or maybe it's Quenton Jackson. Again, maybe it's Tshiebwe. Who knows? But they have the roster spot flexibility to do anything with those guys. But I think that Kendall Brown's chances of making the team and how they fill that spot is still totally TBD. And how they determine what they're going to do with the 15th spot is still TBD also. But they can afford to bring someone in. And because of all that flexibility, I think you'll still hear from Kendall Brown. I think he's got one more shot to prove it. But after that, there's not a lot of benefit to it when the flexibility actually matters for potential trades they could make this season or potential proximity to the luxury tax. So not a good summer league for Kendall Brown. Pacers probably wanted to see more if they wanted to keep him, and he did not show enough to me to prove that he belongs on the team as of this moment. Let's keep it rolling with the two-ways. What are we learning about those? Who stood out? Who didn't? How's that going to shake out for the Pacers? Who is going to remain from last year, if anybody? Before we get to that, though, we need to talk about GameTime, an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the GameTime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, if you see receipt, and their lowest price guarantee. GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets and really any tickets, right? I went to Wings Liberty in the Barclays Center a few years ago using the GameTime app. It was awesome. It was so easy. Love the view from your seat. That was actually the first app I used that ever had it. It was awesome. It was spot on. I liked their customize your spot feature that they have. Get some inspiration going in there. They have last minute tickets. I got them the night before, really. But it was a noon game, so really day of. It was easy to find them all. They have the lowest price guarantee, which means they'll credit you 110% of the difference. You find cheaper tickets elsewhere. They have all-in pricing features, so there's no surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets. That's what GameTime's all about, and I loved it, and you will too. It's a great way to get MLB tickets. So download the app, GameTime, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA. You'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Create an account. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off at GameTime. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We are back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. Your second listen, Locked On NBA. You can hear me and David Ramil from Monday night talking about Team USA. Their 5-0 exhibitions that were not the greatest. The Miami Heat Summer League winning and what players stood out that could matter this coming season from Summer League, and the recent signings from around the league. Evan Mobley's big deal, Spencer Dinwiddie with the Mavs, Sam Hauser with the Celtics in more detail. Here in the Pacer land, they still have their two ways to figure out. Them and the Cavs, the only two teams who have to figure out every single one. And I think there's 4 players in the mix. Personally, I think there's 4 players in the mix for 3 spots, obviously, but that doesn't mean that's the only 4 guys in consideration. So the way I've talked about this before, if you've been listening for a while, is there's generally a point in the draft. Now, teams' salary cap scenarios can make this not totally a perfect description, especially the new second-round pick exception. But there's generally like a line of demarcation in the draft where if you're picked after this pick, you're probably more likely to get a two-way. And if you're picked before this pick, you're more likely to get a contract, and teams and players can try to figure out the best spots for them to go. Pacers were after that line with picks 49 and 50, where two-way is a reasonable path, right? It's not like it's too early for the guy to even be considered for a two-way. So, given that the Pacers roster is largely full and the lateness of these picks, the most logical path, in fact, almost certainly to me, although it's possible it's not the case, would be Tristen Newton and Enrique Freeman get two-way contracts with the Pacers. That makes a lot of sense. It could be 1 year, it could be 2 years. It doesn't really matter because of restricted free agency and all sorts of other factors. But those two are going to be in the Pacers' orbit in some way this season. It's just what happens with draft picks, unless you're Mojave King and you get drafted and stashed. But they didn't have roster spots last year. They do have two-way slots this year. So those two are getting something. Who knows what? Maybe one of them sneaks into the back of the roster. I doubt it, but it's possible. It's still open. But those two guys are getting something, likely a two-way to me. So what else is to consider? There's only one more two-way spot after those guys. What do the Mad Ants need? Their team's looking like a blank slate, right? A lot of guys from last year look like they could end up elsewhere. Jordan Bell already gone. Who knows what's going to happen with Elfrid Payton? Kyle Mangus was somewhere else in Summer League. Pedro Bradshaw could be somewhere else this year. Like, it's all different. So if their team is changing a lot, that's partially why the Pacers might have to do more Exhibit 10 guys. Who they get on a two-way could matter because those players matter a ton. The Mad Ants were pretty good last year because the Pacers were healthy and those guys played a lot in the G League. So it's not specifically that the Mad Ants need anything in particular because they're a blank slate team. So how do they decide how this goes? Because Quenton Jackson and Oscar Tshiebwe, the other two names that absolutely matter in this discussion, right? Tshiebwe on one last year, G League Rookie of the Year, rebounding machine. As you saw in Summer League, he's added some passing, he hit some jumpers, and he also is not the greatest defender and reads the game kind of poorly and is too excited to roll after setting screens and can't really make decisions on those catches. Good player, clear strengths, clear weaknesses. Quenton Jackson, terrible first game of Summer League. Turned it over like crazy, got to the rim, did nothing when he got there, right? Shot it terribly. Missed two free throws that would have won the game. And then was awesome the rest of Summer League, right? Was making everything, much better passing, finished with a positive assist-to-turnover ratio somehow, showed why I was bullish on what he could look like in Summer League because he can get to the rim whenever he wants. He's super athletic, even with the ball. He ended up their third best assist guy, and the two guys who had more assists than him were either at or over him in turnovers in terms of Tristen Newton and Jarace Walker. So good Summer League from Quenton Jackson, who with a much harder shot diet, shot a better percentage from the field, actually, than Oscar Tshiebwe and made 45.5% of his threes. He's a good player. Oscar Tshiebwe is also a good player. What is more needed for the Pacers, right? Both of those guys played well in Summer League to me, at least acceptable in Summer League. They were both awesome in the last game. They both showed at least some sort of signs of growth. They both finished plays in ways that matter. They both dominated the game in ways that you expect from them. I think you could say they made probably an equal number of errors, right? It's not like either of them separated, right? If Quenton Jackson did not have that first game he had against the Nets, if he played decent or better in that game, I think he would have had the better Summer League. If Tshiebwe had a better middle part, his Suns game when Enrique Freeman closed at center, I think Tshiebwe only played, I can't remember, not very many minutes in that game. Maybe he separates, but neither of them separated. So they already were both kind of lumped as restricted free agents. And they're both sort of there still. Who gets that last spot? Does it actually matter, right? Long delay in 2022 when the Pacers were figuring out their second two-way contract slot. Kendall Brown got it in like September. And there was a ton of moves that happened that year before the season. That was the crazy Lakers trade stuff and all these big transactions happened. It made sense to keep roster flexibility as the Pacers and figure out what you need to do after that. From a team perspective, they don't have those kind of concerns this year, but waiting is an option. It sucks for the players, but it's possible the Pacers just wait all summer, right? Oh, let's see what happens with Kendall. Let's see what happens with Oscar. Let's see what happens with Quenton. Maybe they get something else elsewhere, and then it all settles itself out, or maybe someone else becomes available to them they didn't expect. That's a veteran that they could give a non-guaranteed deal to, and then it all trickles down differently for other players. Like, there's just a lot of ways it could go. So maybe they just wait. Maybe no one gets signed imminently, and we have to wait into camp to find out what the Pacers are thinking. Maybe Oscar and Quenton Jackson are in camp, and they're fighting for a spot in some sort of way. There's a lot of ways this could go. So we didn't learn enough about the two ways in Summer League to me. What we did learn is Enrique Freeman played well enough to at least make me talk about, hey, maybe he could get like a standard non-guaranteed contract, but I doubt it. What actually happened in Summer League is no clarity really popped away. Oscar Tshiebwe did switch agents, right? The Octagon account tweeted it. This is very public. This isn't like one of those sneaky ones that he switched agents early in free agency, right? It's not often a guy switches agents because he's so psyched about, his current reality and prospects. So keep that in mind when you think about what the Pacers could be thinking or what Tshiebwe could be thinking, but he played for the Pacers for all Summer League and did a pretty good job. So they have to decide what this is going to look like. Mojave King's out of the picture, I would say. That's just a guess just because he's playing in New Zealand now. They submit tender. They still have his draft rights. So in my head, this is 4 guys for 3 spots, and 2 of them are accounted for in that I would assume Enrique Freeman and Tristen Newton will be getting 2 ways, although it's possible, given the Pacers' back-end roster, that one does not. And that would make this easy if one of them gets a roster spot. But if it's not, 4 guys accounting for 3 things is really hard, right? Some guys have ping-ponged up and down with two-ways in the past, which I'm bringing this up to talk about Kendall Brown for a second. Guys who've been on standard deals and then gone back to two-ways. It's rare, but it happened. But usually when that happens, almost always, not always, but almost always, it's a rookie player, right? It's a first-year player who's just developing with an organization. It's not a third-year player. So Kendall Brown is two-way eligible. I would not expect them to waive him and put him on a two-way, especially for one of these guys that we've been talking about this segment. So can rule him out of that two-way discussion. And so if I had to predict what I think the rest of the Pacers summer looked like, it would be early September, mid-September signing of veteran X to a one-year non-guaranteed contract. Enrique Freeman and Tristen Newton signed two-ways at some point before camp, and maybe they have to sign them to bring them to camp. So something happens with Quenton Jackson and Oscar Tshiebwe that clears it up, and then perhaps they bring someone in to compete with Kendall Brown. Maybe that's even one of the guys we've already talked about. Perhaps they waive him early if they identify someone else they want for the similar role. Who knows? But I would guess that the names we've talked about already on this podcast are the names you'll hear when it comes to potential roster considerations for the Pacers in their roster, because Summer League only provided clarity with Kendall Brown and that his stock went down. I would say everybody else we've talked about today, between Jackson, the draft picks, and Tshiebwe, their stock either went neutral or it didn't really matter from a contract perspective how well they played. If Enrique Freeman or Tristen Newton was the best player on the team, yeah, maybe they would have had a roster spot by now, but they weren't. So I don't know that a ton has changed, but I think the back end of the roster, the names have fortified. The direction the Pacers go might depend on what players end up wanting or what ends up being available to them. Should there be any other names in the mix? Who else matters for the Pacers? What other orbit players, as I call them, should we keep an eye on for the rest of the summer? Let's close out today's show talking about that. Back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. Locked On Heat for listen number 2 to hear more about the Miami Heat Summer League Championship. Khalil Ware, an Indiana Hoosier, taking home second team all summer honors. Jarris Walker also on that team. And lots of other good players from the Heat. And they did a great job laughing about Summer League being more fun than any Heat regular season game last year. So check out Locked On Heat for your second listen today. The back end of the roster, potentially unsettled. You heard all the names. Maybe Dakota Mathias played well enough to be thought about. I thought so at first. His shot kind of faded at the end, but showed that he can really wiggle free, get open, and fling him in when he's there. He's 29, so if you're going to be using two ways to develop, he's probably too old for that. But he's the only guy that played well enough of the non-orbity guys in Summer League for me to go, okay, that is worth thinking about. No one else was consistently good enough to say, yeah, that guy should be in consideration for a real contract with the Pacers. Not Exhibit 10s. Josiah Jordan-James already has one of those. Jumani McNeese maybe should get an Exhibit 10. He played pretty well if he's willing to play in the G League, but I don't think anybody else really popped. Maybe Mathias on an Exhibit 10 if he's willing to take it. Who knows? But you get what I'm saying. There wasn't anyone from the Summer League squad in particular that popped their way into, to me at least, popped their way into the picture of like, yes, this is someone the Pacers should be thinking about with these roster spots or with these two-way spots that they have left. Instead, I think it's names you expected, right? And Shepard and Furphy and Walker already had contracts, so it's really the other 5 guys that consistently played. What does their future look like? No one really knew. Sneaks in to the mix. So a couple other free agency notes to talk about here for the Pacers. If James Johnson is not interested in playing anymore, or the Pacers aren't interested in having him back, which would still surprise me, I still think if they're going to fill the 15th spot, which again, their salary structure allows them to do, all the free agency is pretty dead right now. I don't know if there's a marketing blockade or if there's just, no interest from teams. They're feeling pretty settled about their teams. I think the marketing blockade would end in theory on August 6th. Once it's over, I got that date right. Once that's over, then maybe your Gordon Hayward, Tyus Jones types can sneak in wherever they want. I only bring that up to say, if the Pacers are going to, fill their team with someone not named James Johnson, which I don't know if they would or wouldn't do that, someone who's willing to accept a role where they would not play is what's going to matter to them, right? James Wiseman in that way made some sense as a signing. And so you have to scroll down to the vets, right? You can't just look and go, oh, Gordon Hayward, they could sign Gordon Hayward. Yeah, but he's not going to play. Why would he want to come to the Pacers? Keep that in mind here. So, if it's not James Johnson, perhaps, like JaVale McGee, I get, that kind of name, right? Thad Young, I mentioned already. Those are the kind of names that I think would make sense. Anthony Gill types, for the Pacers to consider with that 15th spot, because they can fit someone in. Bismack Biyombo, Danilo Gallinari. He probably wants to play. He's too good for that. Does Patty Mills still want to play? He's 36 now. You get the idea of what I'm saying, though. So don't go hunting for names that are good or are deserving of minutes and money. Instead, look for the guys that are closer to the end of their career, I think at least, or guys that aren't deserving of fully guaranteed deals, like James Wiseman, who got $500,000 because he wants to develop in Indiana. I think that is noteworthy, but that might come down to James Johnson. Again, I don't truly know, but that's just what makes the most sense to me, given that I saw him at the game with the rest of the Pacers team, and that the Pacers love having him around and have signed him to 6 contracts in total in the last 2 seasons. I guess the only other thing to cover from a back end of the roster perspective or a free agency perspective, because tomorrow the whole episode is going to be about extensions. Andrew Nembhard became extension eligible earlier this week, so we'll do one segment on each of the extension eligible guys in detail, and then we can cool it on offseason stuff until one more show in August, and then we'll really chill out until they actually do something. So 2 things to bring up still. 1, Doug McDermott, still not on a team. I get that he wasn't very good for the Pacers. Caitlin and I talked about on his season review some of the reasons for that beyond his traditional age and things like that. But he is a good player. If you can shoot at that level, you should be on a team to me. So maybe he's a guy that gets on a non-guaranteed deal with somebody. If the Pacers could commit to having him behind Jarris Walker in their mental depth chart, sure, go for it as the 15th guy non-guaranteed, or even have him in Kendall Brown's spot. That would make some sense to me if he's willing to come back, but they'd have to commit to not playing him, right? That's a difference from last year when he was playing and was clearly the 10th guy, but he's still hanging out there. Everyone else who was with the Pacers last year is accounted for, except for Furkan Korkmaz, who they waived just after the trade deadline. Still not on a team. I thought he might come back to the NBA last year after he cleared waivers. That did not end up happening. So I guess the only other guy worth a shot here is Isaiah Wong. Him and Kyle Mangus, actually, I guess. Kyle Mangus played for the Lakers in Summer League. He was with the Indiana Mad Ants last year and was quite good. I would say that him not being with the Pacers Summer League team at all suggests that maybe he won't be back with the Mad Ants. And Isaiah Wong, obviously, is noteworthy because the other 2 guys who were on a 2-way last year for the Pacers did get qualifying offers. They're restricted free agents. Wong is not. And he played for the Suns Summer League team. Similar thinking there of probably not going to be back if he's playing for another team's summer squad completely, which makes a lot of sense. They drafted another point guard. Quenton Jackson was still around, but I think that was as official as it could possibly be in terms of Wong playing with another team. It was fun to see him playing in that Suns-Pacers game, the only game, ironically, the Pacers won. But he had some nice baskets and had stuff to say. So back end of the Pacers roster, still a shrug. I think the chances Kendall Brown is around for the long haul went down, and everything else is still floating up in the air. But now all the considerations the Pacers will be thinking about for the next 2-ish months as they sort out spots 13 through 15, or really 14 or 15, as well as their 2-way guys. Tomorrow, let's keep going on the roster consideration stuff with something done. Talk extensions. We've seen the Pacers offseason really form. Now let's dive deep on how that impacts Andrew Nembhard, TJ McConnell, Isaiah Jackson. Should they extend? Could they extend? What deal actually makes sense for them now that we know the Pacers' long-term outlook? And then Friday, a cool one, talking about a lot of the Pacers' new guys. And then we will fade away from free agency topics into the fun offseason stuff. I'll try to come up with good stuff for August. I already have a pretty lengthy list of stuff that I would like to talk about and who I would like to talk about it with. Hope you guys enjoyed today's show. If you have questions, at Tony R. East on Twitter is the way to go, or the show at Locked On Pacers there to see the topics of the show before you listen. And also comment down below on YouTube. I do, in fact, read those. Thank you guys a ton for tuning in today. Hope you're having a wonderful day. We will see you very soon.